Welcome back to Evergreen Marketing Era for Women Entrepreneurs. I'm your host, Andrea Singletary, a podcast strategist for women entrepreneurs who want to get consistent leads and clients from their podcast. Okay, today's episode is all about creating a podcast launch strategy as a business owner, specifically setting up your podcast to attract your highest quality leads from day one. So if you're thinking about starting a podcast or you're in the beginning stages of launching a podcast, this episode was created specifically for you. Now, I wanted to do this episode because often I have clients come to me, after they've launched their podcast and they've been at it, for some time, and they all say similar things or feel similar things. They ask the question, is my podcast actually doing anything for my business? They question whether a podcast is worth their time or whether they should scrap it and focus on another long-form platform. Their listeners aren't joining their email list, they're not converting into their offers or inquiring about working with them, which is super frustrating. Their podcast feels like an energy, time, and money suck. And when I say money suck, I'm talking about those who are actually outsourcing the production of their podcast. And they consider quitting their podcast. This feeling and this questioning is one of the reasons why we have so many podcasts that go inactive before they even reach their 10th or 20th episode. And I don't want that to be you. So we're going to talk about what it actually takes to launch a podcast that grows your business. Now, before I get into that, I do have a special announcement. After supporting over 60 women with launching, optimizing, and monetizing their podcasts, I decided to create something for business owners who want to launch a podcast. Now, I've been in the podcasting space for over 4 years now. I've done everything from being a producer to a strategist, even hosting my own podcast. And with each of those roles and these years of experience, I have learned a lot. And one thing I see missing from the podcast industry is a podcast launch course specifically for business owners. Many of the podcast launch courses out there focus heavily on the tech, and the strategies taught are geared towards influencer and hobby podcasters. But as a business owner, your focus isn't getting brand deals and sponsorships. You want to get leads and clients from your podcast. I got tired of seeing, this need in the online space and decided to do something about it. Next month, I am launching my official podcast launch course for business owners called Podcast Like a Business Owner. I am so geeked out about this and getting it out into the world. I've been sitting on doing this for a while and I was like, you know what? It's time to make it happen. I need to stop thinking about it and do something about it. So if you've been wanting to start a podcast for your business and you want to do it the right way so you actually have listeners sign up for your lead magnet and inquire about working with you, then you need to get on the waitlist for this course. I also have an exclusive bonus just for those on the waitlist. So head to momaturnedmompreneur.com/waitlist to get on the waitlist now. And this is also linked below in the episode description and in the show notes. Now let's talk about what a podcast launch strategy for business owners actually looks like. The number one thing is you have to get clear on your who, what, why, and how. Now, I've talked about this before. I believe I've sent an email on this, and I may have mentioned it on the podcast. But before you ever choose your podcast name, before you map out your launch episodes, before you hit record on an episode, on your intro, your outro, your trailer, before you do any of those things, you need to be clear on who you're speaking to, what you want your podcast to do for you, why you are creating this podcast, and how you will serve your audience through this podcast. And when I say audience, I'm talking about those people who are your ideal clients, potential clients, the people who you're actually called to serve. You have to get clear on this because it's literally going to drive everything you do with your podcast. Everything. Every little thing. It's going to determine how you show up in your content, how you structure your episodes, how you name your episodes, what topics you speak on. Again, what you actually name your podcast, so that way the people who are looking for your content actually find you. It determines all of that. And this is also why the first module of my course, Podcast Like a Business Owner, it walks you through this process. So before we ever get to the tech part, to the mapping out your content, you go through this module first, because I want this to be ingrained in your brain as you're mapping out your podcast. I want you to know, and I want you to think about it with every little thing you do with your podcast. This is the difference between yapping to yap and yapping with intention. If you want your podcast to actually do something for your business, you need to answer these questions first, because it's going to help you make sure you're actually talking about the things that you need to be talking about to attract those people who need your podcast, but also need your offers, need your expertise, need your support. You got to know the answer to these questions. If not, you're going to be that person who is talking about all these random things on your podcast. And while you may be able to really contribute to these conversations and, very knowledgeable and have experience with these different topics, they have nothing to do with your business. They have nothing to do with your ideal client, what they're actually going through, what they actually need. Now, they may listen because they enjoy the content, they enjoy what you're saying. But if you're speaking on topics that don't directly connect to what you're doing in your business, how you serve your clients, you're not going to be able to help them make that next step or take that next step to actually working with you, because you don't actually have an offer around that thing, because it's not your area of expertise. If you're creating a podcast for your business, you need to answer these questions first before you do anything with a podcast. The next thing is that you need to make sure you focus on your listeners' wants and needs instead of making the podcast about you. So this actually connects to the first one, but you want to avoid those random episode topics. Again, we are being intentional with our podcast. And so every episode we create, it needs to serve some type of purpose, whether that is to attract new listeners who would actually qualify for our offers, nurture our current listeners, or convert our current listeners into our offers. It needs to do one of those three things. And you need to know which episodes do what. Choosing your podcast name. You want to choose one that is searchable and relevant to your ideal listener. I know a lot of people like to name their podcast their name, but unless you are really well known in the online space, like a celebrity entrepreneur, naming your podcast your name is not going to do anything for you, because your ideal listeners aren't searching your name. They're searching something specific to them that relates to them, that's going to give them the answers they are looking for. And unfortunately, they don't know your name is connected to the answers they need. You want to choose a podcast name that is actually searchable. You want to make sure your podcast name actually clearly communicates what the podcast is about and who it's for. So again, your name doesn't do that. While your name may be very beautiful, it doesn't communicate that to potential listeners. The third thing is, don't hyperfixate on vanity metrics like hitting your highest downloads during your launch or trying to rank on the charts. The goal is to attract the right listeners. And I know this kind of goes against certain things, but the reality is that those vanity metrics don't necessarily do anything for you. And I'm going to touch on this some more, but I really want to touch on this because I do see this as a selling point for like many podcast strategists, podcast producers that tell you, I can help you get on the charts and different things like that. And while yes, that does create more visibility for you, it doesn't mean that it's going to convert into leads and sales. I had a client come to me. When she came to me, she had over 200,000 downloads. Her podcast was very popular. It was ranking on the charts. She had a lot of visibility, but she had never had any of her listeners convert into her offers. Not one. They loved her content. They were eating it up. She was getting those messages about how impactful her content was, but none of them actually turned into clients. So I'm not saying you can't try to go for these things, because visibility is a good thing, even for your podcast. However, that cannot be your top priority, especially when you're launching. Because again, you are a business owner. Influencers, they care about those numbers because potential brand deals, they're going to ask those questions. How large is your audience? What are your weekly and monthly downloads like? They're going to ask those specific questions. And ranking on the charts, that's going to help them stand out to potential brand partners. But that's not what you're doing here. You're not trying to get brand deals. You're not doing that. You're trying to attract people who truly want and need what you have to offer. You're trying to attract those listeners who are like, yes, this is the person I've been looking for. This is the solution I need right now. And so hitting the highest downloads, getting on the charts, the Apple charts, that doesn't determine whether those people find you and whether or not they actually convert into your offers. So that's not what we're going to focus on here. We're not going to hyper fixate on it. Again, it's not bad, but it shouldn't be your main focus. It shouldn't be your number one priority. And I bring this up too because I see this all the time where people are, questioning whether or not their podcast is quote unquote successful. And you can really mess yourself up, especially when you start your podcast. You're going into this really just fixated on hitting those highest downloads, getting on the charts. So if you're not seeing that, you're going to start to question whether or not you're good at podcasting, whether or not your podcast is successful. And it's going to discourage you and eventually can lead to you quitting. The reality is that podcasting is a long game when it comes to numbers and hitting the charts, unless you already have a huge audience. Now, this isn't to say that you can't ever hit the charts. I have been on the Apple charts many times. But for me and for business owners who are leveraging the platform to get leads and clients, that is not my top priority. That is not going to determine whether or not someone listens to my podcast, binges my podcast, and becomes a client. More important than that, though, whether or not you hit, thousands of downloads during your launch, it doesn't determine if you're going to sign a client from your podcast. You can sign clients directly from your podcast, even with a small audience. But if you quit when you've just gotten started, then you won't create the necessary content to attract your highest quality leads, nurture them, and convert them into your offers. And so this is why I don't want you to hyperfixate on that. I don't want you to make that one of your podcast goals, especially during your launch. Because if you don't hit that goal, you're going to be frustrated and you may quit. So we're not focusing on that. Now, if it happens, great. We will celebrate that. But that is not our top priority. Okay. The next thing is making sure you have set the habit of having a clear call to action in every episode, even starting with your launch episodes. If you don't go into each episode knowing what you're selling, whether it's a paid or free offer, you won't get leads or see conversions because 9 times out of 10, you're going to treat your call to action as an afterthought. So shoving it in, in the last 10 seconds of the episode, or you're going to completely forget to mention it and just link to it in the show notes. That is not going to make your listeners take action. So you want to make sure to outline and record your launch episodes as well as your future episodes, already knowing what you want your listeners to do after they listen to the podcast. You have to make it a habit. This is part of that intentionality piece. This is why inside a podcast like a business owner, there's an entire module dedicated to solely creating call to actions for your launch episodes. And it walks you through how to choose your call to action for your episodes and how to position your offers in the episode. Like, this is one of the things that I often see missing, or again, people shoving that call to action in at the very end whenever I audit a podcast. And it's why you're not seeing those conversions you want to see. You're not seeing people reach out and inquire because you're not connecting the dots for them. You're not telling them what they need to do. You're not showing them why your offer is the solution they need right now. You want to make sure before you hit record, as you're outlining your episodes, know what you're selling in the episode. Again, this is both for your paid and free offers. And when I talk about selling, like I even talk about selling your free offers, because just because it's free doesn't mean people are going to sign up for it. Like, you have to give them a reason why to, sign up for it and everything. So go into every episode knowing what you're selling. All right, the last one, okay, this is again your podcast launch strategy. Plan ahead and create a content bank of ideas so that you can keep the momentum going after you launch. If you don't want to become a pod fade, meaning you just ghost your audience, you need to have a content bank you can easily pull from. It shouldn't be that each week you are wondering, what do I talk about on the podcast? You should already know. And creating that content bank will make it simple, especially during those times when you feel like you don't have anything to talk about. This is why inside of my course, I include a podcast content planner that is going to help you do a brain dump of content ideas. But again, it's not any old random episodes. You're going to do a brain dump of content ideas to attract new listeners that are actually qualified for your offers, nurture your current listeners, and sell your offers to your listeners. So you'll be creating content essentially for each stage of the customer journey. You'll have that brain dump of content. So depending on what your goals or focus is, for the month, you will know, okay, I need to do this type of episode because I'm trying to get leads right now. Or you know what? I'm ready to sell this offer. I've been nurturing, I've been getting leads, nurturing those leads. Now it's time for me to actually start selling the offer. So you will already have those topics ready to pull from them. Now, you may be wondering why didn't you tell us anything about like the tech and the actual launch process? Now, my course does cover all of that, but I'm going to be real. The tech part and the actual, walking through the mechanics of like actually launching your podcast. So again, all the tech stuff, that's the easy part. Where people, and I don't want to say people, where business owners lose momentum is actually getting the podcast to do something for their business. Actually getting the podcast to bring in those leads and convert them into their offers. And so that is why for this podcast launch strategy for business owners, I focused heavily on that aspect because that is the part that is missing. But just so you know, the course, it walks you through all the tech stuff. Everything from what equipment you need, setting up that equipment, and, editing, recording, all of those things. It even comes with templates. So I have templates for like writing or scripting, I should say, your intro and outro. There's a recording outline template that walks you through my process, and it tells you where you should be introducing your call to action. Walks you through all of that. So you will get all of that too. But I want you, again, go into launching your podcast thinking like a business owner, viewing this as a marketing and sales platform. And when you make that shift, that's when you start to see the results. That's when it's like, okay, this is really supposed to grow my business. This is going to help me grow my business. And you will start seeing that ROI from your podcast. But you have to go into it. You have to set it up like that from day one. Okay? All right. So those are the 5 areas that will help you build an effective podcast launch strategy as a business owner. Like I said, Podcast Like a Business Owner supports you in each of these areas. I literally give you the roadmap all of the resources, templates, and tutorials needed to launch a strategic podcast for your business. So head on over to mamaturnedmompreneur.com/waitlist to get on the waitlist now. This is linked below in the episode description and in the show notes. All right, I'll catch you in the next episode.